Good evening, keyboard friends. Tonight I would like to make a quick little video comparing a few different linear switches that I have, especially the smoothness of the switches and the sound of the switches. Recently I got interested in linear switches, and part of the thing that's fun about them for me is that they are smoother and they sound nice. So I have 5 different linear switches here. I have put them on the number row of my keyboard. They're on keys 1 through 5, and I have lubed them all using the same lube procedure and the same lube, which is Tribosys 3204. The way that I lubed them was with a paintbrush. I brushed the lube on the lower housings, on the rails of the housing, right here. I lubed the rails of the housing. I lubed around the base of the housing where the spring touches and the outer sides of the housing spring peg. I lubed inside the middle of the spring peg. I lubed the parts of the leaf that touch the stem, and I also went back at the end and gave a quick little brush to the rails of the housing again. And then the stems I also lubed using a paintbrush. Once again, I lubed all of the outer surfaces of the stem. I lubed up behind the stem where the spring touches. I lubed the surface of this peg here and tried to make sure that it was a uniform thin coat all over the stem. And the reason I wanted to do this sound comparison with lubed switches is because I think anyone who's serious about having a good sounding keyboard, or a good feeling keyboard for that matter, is probably interested in lubing. So I think it's better to compare how those switches sound lubed than unlubed, because for me, how they sound unlubed is kind of irrelevant. So let me begin by just pushing each switch a few times. You can make a game out of this. You can try to guess which switch is which. There's 5 here. And some of the common linear switches that are popular. So see if you can guess before I reveal which switch is which. So first I'll tap each switch a few times, each key. Then I'll go back and I'll emphasize the bottom out sound by bottoming the key out harder and then releasing it slower. Then I'll do the opposite, where I'll slowly depress the key and then release it quickly to emphasize the top out sound. And then after that, I'll take some recordings of the switches cycled more slowly so that you can hear if there's any kind of scratching noises or any friction kind of noises. And then at the end, I'll go ahead and reveal which is which, and I'll also tell you which switch I like the sound and the feel of best, and rank them. So here we go. Now I'm going to press the switches at the corner of the keycap to try to emphasize any roughness that might be there in the housing. Now I'm not sure if you could hear all the tiniest little noises, so I'm going to reposition the microphone to make it easier to hear those little details of whatever scratch might be there. First I'm going to push the key on axis, and then I'm going to push it off axis at the edge. Alright, one last quick little clack here, and then I'm going to do the reveal and let you know which switch is which. Okay, here comes the big reveal. Number one was, drum roll, Greetech Red. Number two was Cherry Retooled Red. Number 3 was Razor. Just kidding. Revo White, which is essentially the same as a Gateron Milky Housing linear switch. Number 4 is TTC Red. And number 5, if you didn't already guess it, it's a fake Telio. So when I say a fake Telio, this is an alias housing with a different Gateron linear stem. I just put a Revo White stem in there because it should be pretty close to a Telio stem. Now if you don't know, the alias housing is almost the same as the Zeal housing that he uses for Zealios and Telios. The main difference is that the bottom of the alias housing has a big old LED cutout. You probably won't be able to see it on here, but I don't have one right here. But the bottom of a genuine Zeal housing just has the little holes for the LED leads, and the alias stem instead has a big LED cutout. So that could affect the sound a little bit. So just disclaimer. So now, once again, this was the Greetech Red. This is the Cherry Retold Red. This is the Revo White / Gateron Milky linear. This is the TTC Red, and this is the alias housing with the Gateron linear stem in it. Now, which ones did I like best? Let's see. I'm gonna rank them in 4 categories. Smoothness for on-axis key press, which means like a ideal key press where you're pushing it, your finger is exerting the force completely parallel to the axis that the plane that the stem slides on. So on-axis key press smoothness. Off-axis key press smoothness is the second category I'll rank them on, and that means like I'm pushing it at the edge of the key cap, so that I'm exerting some force perpendicular to the axis of the stem travel. So the third category I'll rank them on is best bottom out sound, and then finally best top out sound, and then I'll tell you overall which switch I like the sound best on, and then I'll tell you which switch I like best overall. So for me, the smoothest on-axis key press, this one's it's close, but it's not that close, and it's this one. It's the alias housing. So everyone knows that Zeal switches are very smooth. The alias housing is an almost clone, so it's to be expected that it would be very smooth. The second smoothest, I think, for on-axis key press is actually the TTC Red, which is interesting because I didn't know that much about these switches. Thanks to Mike at Novel Keys for providing me one of these to test. So that was really nice of him. Third smoothest, I thought, for on-axis key press was this Greetech Red. Once again, Mike from Novel Keys supplied me with this, so thanks to him, this sample. Fourth smoothest on-axis key press, I thought, was the Cherry Retooled Red. So second to last in smoothness for on-axis key press. And then the least smooth, I thought, for on-axis key press, because I noticed the friction the most for on-axis key press out of all these. Most of these are really smooth for on-axis key press, like smooth enough to where you probably wouldn't even notice it, but the one that I did notice the friction most on for the on-axis key press was actually the Revo White. Now, in terms of smoothness for off-axis key press, the results for me were actually quite a bit different. The smoothest one wasn't different, you know. No surprise, the smoothest for off-axis key press and on-axis key press is this one, the alias housing. So that shouldn't be a surprise. This is just a super smooth housing. It doesn't matter if you're pushing it on axis, off axis, if you're pushing the stem completely sideways. It seems like nothing I can do to this switch makes it feel rough. It just always feels smooth, just crazy smooth. Second smoothest for off-axis key press, oddly enough, I actually ranked as the Revo White, which is funny because it got last place in my estimation for on-axis key press smoothness. But for off-axis key press smoothness, I actually thought it did better than the rest of these, other than the Alias. And the reason I liked it better for off-axis key press is because other than this freak of nature here that's super smooth, these other 4 switches, when I did an off-axis key press, they all had some kind of inconsistent feeling roughness that I noticed. Whereas this one, the Revo White, the off-axis key press had scratch or friction, but it was consistent. Like, it felt more consistent to my fingers. It didn't feel like it was catching and then breaking loose, and then it was like the difference between a rough grit sandpaper and a finer grit sandpaper. Whereas this one, the Revo White, felt more like a finer grit sandpaper, whereas these other ones felt more irregular, like chunkier for the off-axis key press. Now, don't get me wrong; they still all felt very smooth to me, but this was my favorite for the off-axis key press, which is funny because I gave it last place for on-axis smoothness. Now, in terms of sound, I think this is even more subjective than the rest of my review up until now. So, sound, take what I say with a grain of salt. You can listen for yourself and decide what you think. But I thought the best bottom-out sound, personally, was actually the Greetech Red. I like the kind of deeper sound that it makes, kind of I don't know how to describe it, maybe a little thockier. My second favorite bottom-out sound was the good old, reliable, retooled Cherry Red. Shouldn't be too surprising that it's got a nice sound. They're popular for a reason. My third favorite bottom-out sound was the Revo White. I like that it's kind of muted. I think it sounds kind of cool. My fourth favorite, second to last, I rated for bottom-out sound was this TTC Red. Not crazy about the bottom-out sound. But my least favorite bottom-out sound comes from the smoothest switch, which is this Alias housing here. Alias linear that I made, which is kind of like a rough approximation of a Telio. I didn't love the sound of that bottom out on that switch. Now, in terms of top out, things were a little bit different. They were similar, but not exactly the same. My favorite top out sound actually came from the Revo White. I like that it sounds kind of the top out to me doesn't sound as loud as some of the other switches, and it sounds kind of like a more muted sound. So that was my favorite top out sound. My second favorite top out sound came from the Greetech Red. I thought it sounded pretty good. My third favorite top out sound came from the good old Cherry retooled Red. My second to last place rating for top out sound goes to the Alias linear here, which might surprise you, but actually my least favorite, it was kind of an anomaly, is the TTC. For top out sound, the TTC Red was my least favorite because it almost sounded like there was something wrong with it when it was topping out. I don't know, almost like something was vibrating or rattling, or I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it just bothered me. It was the top out sound to the TTC Red was just grating to me, which is unfortunate because this switch feels really smooth to me, and it was in my top 3 for both categories of smoothness. So, but the top out sound really bothered me. So, taking into account smoothness combined with the sound of the switches, if I had to pick an overall favorite, for me it would be a tie actually between these two, the Revo White and the Greetech Red. Now, the reason it's I can't really decide which one I like better is because I really like the sound of the Revo, but I feel like the performance is better on the Greetech in terms of smoothness overall. But there's a little caveat there that the off-axis key presses sometimes feel a little less consistent to me than the Revo White. So when I take it all together, I like the sound of the Revo better. I like the feel of the Greetech slightly better. So these are my two favorites overall. After that, I would have to say probably the good old cherry retooled red. But it's a close thing. I would almost say it's a tie between the cherry red and the fake Telio, because for me the fake Telio is just so much smoother that it almost cancels out what I don't like about how it sounds. So for me, these two are tied for my second favorite. And then the TTC, unfortunately, is my least favorite all around, and that has to do, which is unfortunate because the on-axis key press to me on the TTC was second smoothest of all of these switches, second only to the fake Telio, which is and a very close second, I would say. But the off-axis key presses, I did feel some irregularity and kind of inconsistency with those. So for me, that combined with the top-out sound, which is really unpleasant to me, makes this one my least favorite. Now, just so you know, this ranking, I have to be very picky to even pick my favorites here, because I think all of these feel really good now that they're lubed, and so I think they all sound pretty good and they all feel really good. But that's how I would rate them. So hopefully this video will be helpful to someone, and I wish you good luck in selecting yourself some awesome linear switches.